This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with Gordon T. Long, and I have with me this morning Charles Hugh Smith, well-recognized writer on the web, who is the publisher of the website of2minds.com. Good morning, Charles, and welcome back to Macro Analytics.
Thank you, Gordon. Glad to be here.
You were just in France, were you not, for a month?
Yes.
How was it? Are you speaking French?
A petit peu. A little bit. Nothing as accomplished as your command of French, but enough to navigate when people can't speak English, which is actually quite common outside of the tourist areas. Yeah.
I noticed in your articles there's more mention of French terminology. And as a matter of fact, we're going to talk about degrowth today. And I assume that came out of when you were in France.
Yes, that's right. The word in French is décroissance. And, but I believe it's a movement that's catching on throughout Europe. So there's a German and a Spanish equivalent as well.
Very good pronunciation, by the way. Well done. Anyway,
Yeah.
Charles, with Thanksgiving being here and Christmas being pumped at us everywhere we turn, I thought it's the right time to talk U.S. retailing, the U.S. preoccupation with materialism, and our 70% consumption-based U.S. economy. However, instead of talking the problem, I thought we would do a thought experiment on the way, on what the real problem is, and therefore the solutions, or what might possibly be the solution, and use one of your articles as the cornerstone. In case some don't think there's a problem, I have a few slides that I'd like to show briefly before we get into that, Charles. And please jump in on any of these slides you have any comments. Well, first of all, the United States is a 70% consumption economy. The U.S. consumer has been the global engine around the world. And Charles, as you recall, for the last 25 years, everybody's wondered when the U.S. consumer would finally slow, and he never slowed. But it powered the rest of the world. And yes, now we're a 70% consumption economy. The rest of the world are only 55% the developed nations, and most of the emerging countries are well below 35%. So, this is not like it's a new problem that this might slow, but the issue is, and I'm showing it here, is that the U.S. per capita disposable income has been steadily falling. And as you would expect, retail sales is following that. This, however, hasn't stopped the relentless retail expansion, as everyone chases and expects to get a larger and larger market share. And not to be silly, and we were talking earlier, but frankly, it has become just that. And if, for example, if 10 competitors all show their naive, greedy investors, they'll get the 60% market share. That's 600% of the available market, and somebody's going to fail spectacularly. And when I see Walmart, where their earnings per share, and it tracks what's happening with global GDP, and that's not by coincidence, and them doing food banks for their employees for Thanksgiving, we know there's a problem. When their employees can't make enough money that they have to live on food stamps and do food drives, something's seriously wrong. Would you agree with that, Charles?
Absolutely.
I was stunning when I saw that. But it's leading to such inequality and distortions, which is going to implode in this retail market space. This chart I thought was fascinating. And it shows that the stores that are doing well from quantitative easing are the high end. It's blatantly obvious, and even when the divergence started to happen. And I'm showing J.C. Penney's, Macy's, and Kohl's here, and J.C. Penney's may not make it through this particular season. So how long can this sustain itself? And I think my personal opinion, Charles, is we're right at that cusp right now. And this chart here is showing the holiday spending patterns and forecasts and how it relates to recession says we're right on the verge of a major pullback starting to come. It may be one of the major themes possibly in 2014 ever mind the possibility of a recession coming out of this retail segment, because the consumers, we both know, are well tapped out. Any comments you have?
No, I think you've summarized the situation very clearly with these charts.
I've got so many, but before we get into what the solution is, I was driving. I live just outside of Boston, my home, but I commute to Boston, and I go through by the buildings so frequently, and you see them all the time that you may not pay attention to them. But if you were to look at the buildings here in the greater Boston area, empty manufacturing space is absolutely overwhelmed. Every manufacturing building you drive by is boarded up, shut up, or has been converted into something else like a dance studio, an art studio, or whatever. It's just a fact of life. But that it all stems from the build-out, the massive build-out we had that imploded with the dot-com bubble and the technology that built up through the 90s and 2000. We had Deck here for $300,000. We had Prime. We had Wang. We had Data General. I can go on. And these were all employing 100,000, 150,000 people. Well, all of those, I was here with Motorola. We had 26 different facilities, 12,000 people, all gone. Next town over, Hewlett-Packard, gone. Texas Instrument, the next town, gone. And they leave huge numbers of buildings that are just all basically empty, and they're trying to make them into malls. But it was a wave of the 2000. The next thing you'll see is office space. It's just everywhere for rent, for lease, for sale, but it's empty office towers. But some of it came from that era, but most of it is a fallout from 2007, 2008 financial crisis. And why that is because during the 2000, with the housing explosion that we had, the McMansions, the yuppie palaces, the types of industries that needed offices that came out of it, we had mortgage brokers, we had sales agents, we had builders, contractors, appraisers, lenders, all the housing cabinet makers, upgrading and remodeling. It was crazy with home equity loans going on. All that office space was built, consumed, and now is empty, has been stripped down. I mean, if you look at an office building around here, there's 4 offices that are used, and there's 6 or 7 that are empty. But it was the second wave. The second wave was this implosion from the housing. I see a third wave, and this third wave has been what has been built around here are big box retail stores. They're everywhere. And every mall has been expanded with these box stores, but they're empty, Charles. I mean, if you look at the strip malls, they're just completely empty. And the big 3-story malls, there's hardly any cars in them. And the only difference is when you see a dollar store or an Ocean State, these are big discount chains around here, those ones are full. And I think that that's the next wave. And what I saw was employees that got laid off in the dot-com, the technology, all got into the housing wave. And I'm walking into stores, and I'm seeing the people that were in the housing wave have all moved to the retail stores, because Kohl's, for example, or Target's around here employs 225 people in a Target store. That's because it runs 3 shifts, 7 days a week. It doesn't pay anything, but it employs a lot of people. What happens when these retail stores start shutting down? We just shut down Borders here in this area because they went out of business, and there are quite a number of them. There were a lot of people that were laid off. I don't know what you're seeing in California.
Even in I would say the American West, I'm seeing the same thing. Tremendous numbers of empty buildings, and the buildings that are coming up are either gigantic retail complexes with a new Home Depot and another Staples, and kind of a duplication or a redundancy of existing stores. And we all know that you can see a Starbucks on practically every corner. Well, where there used to be 1 or 2 Home Depots or Lowe's within a couple mile radius of our house, now there seems to be 1 every mile. And of course, we all know you're not selling, you're not finding new customers. You're simply poaching somebody else's customers, including your own from another location.
Exactly. And with the consumer slowing, they're all starting to chase tighter and tighter consumer consumption level. And the discounting is phenomenal that we're seeing. My wife came home from shopping, and she said, she asked me, she said, how do they do it? She says, I go in for an item and it's $50, and I've got this coupon, which is it's automatically 20 or 30% off. Then I have this coupon here. I have my card that gives me this discount. She said, I'm almost getting it for free. Well, I says, you're not getting it for free. She says, it's getting pretty darn close. She says, how do they make money at it? And that is, it's not that they just discount. How do they make money at it? And what's going on, Charles, with this retail is it's all in the game of accounting. And part of the 2008 stock market, or the financial crisis, it was all about mortgages having to be repriced. But nobody really paid attention to all the commercial property that need to be repriced. And what happened was all of that's been rolled over because of the REITs that did the financing, et cetera. But that doesn't mean these empty office complexes are making any money. They're losing money. But why aren't we seeing this total collapse in the commercial real estate business? Well, if you're a J.C. Penney's or whatever, you can amortize these stores over a long period of time, like Borders did. So you amortize it over 25 or 30 years, and you're showing a great profit. And then suddenly Borders is broke. Well, then all these stores are not 25 years. It's dead loss right now today, and they can't sell them, can't get out, and it's massive loss. So you can make profits by amortization and depreciation, by taking debt off the book as contingent liability. You can do everything you want. I won't bore people with how the accounting's done, but I will tell you this, where it ends is cash flow. And if you don't, because you can't just artificially create cash flow. You need top line growth where customers coming in and spending some cash. And as I said to my wife, the reason they're selling this stuff at these rates is they need the cash. They got to move the inventory, and they're already discounting inventories at cost. I can tell you right now for the Christmas season around here.
Well, Gordon, I think we should step back and add a little context to what you're saying about the retail sector by looking at the household sector. And as we all know, household debt has been increasing at a rapid clip for decades. And we also know that when it's adjusted for inflation, what we call real income, that the average household income has actually declined by about 7% from the year 2000. And so clearly the consumer has been relying on debt, credit cards, loans, HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, student loans, various forms of debt to fund their consumption. And it's not being supported by actual real income growth. And so this kind of leads us to this catchphrase or catchword, which started, as to the best of my knowledge, in Europe, called degrowth. And what degrowth proposes is that perhaps life would be better and our economies more stable. And if we looked at consuming less, and perhaps doing more with the resources at hand, rather than seeking what might be called mindless growth. But I think if that's too harsh a term, then we can say growth with diminishing returns. In other words, just the concept that's powered the global economy, in whether you call it socialism, communism, or capitalism, the ideology has all been the same, which is more consumption of everything is the greatest good, because that generates prosperity. And what's being challenged by reality, by the implosion of all these waves of financial bubbles, is maybe that's not the case. Maybe consumption cannot just keep going up when it's based on declining incomes and expanding credit. And a lot of people are starting to question if the consumption that we're doing now is actually adding value to our lives. And this is I've sort of summarized some of the characteristics of degrowth, and this is one, is that perhaps consumerism beyond a certain point is spiritual, psychological junk food, that it actually reduces our well-being rather than adds to it. And one mindset that like the nation of Bhutan, which is a small nation in the Himalayas, they have been pioneering this concept of gross national happiness. In other words, rather than measure the amount of consumption that you've managed, that you look at other metrics for the well-being of your people and your economy. And part of degrowth is also a recognition that resources that were the foundation of our consumption, they're not infinite. And of course, we can say, oh, we have lots of natural gas and so on, and maybe we have energy for another 200 years, but we don't have enough. The fisheries are already depleted, and in a lot of areas, the fresh water's already depleted, and the topsoil's depleted. And so these are resources you can't go buy replacements for. And so even if you have energy, if you have no soil and no water, you're not going to get any food. I don't care how much energy or money you have. So that's a recognition of the limits of key resources is part of degrowth. Another point that is so obvious as that we all have seen, and you mentioned it before we started the show, Gordon, that there's just a tremendous number of garage sales and people selling this stuff in their storage units and so on. There's just such a diminished return for consumption. You know, our enjoyment and use and our 9th or 10th pair of shoes is so much less than the first or second. And this goes on and on. And so it raises the question, what consumption do we, can we look forward to that's actually adding a tremendous amount of value to our lives? And the answer for most middle class people in developed economies is very little. And so people are buying stuff that's faddish or that's that's in their garage sale a couple months from now, or it's packed in the box that it was purchased in and it's sitting in some storage unit. And so to say that kind of consumption is useful, practical, valuable, that's really a stretch. And then the last point is simply the unity of the ideological systems around this marginal growth as the only good. It's really quite striking that the socialist countries want more mindless growth, and the communist countries want more mindless growth, and the capitalist countries, they want the same thing. And so it's not an ideological problem, it's more of a financial resource situation is how I would frame it.
You know, here in the United States, we have a preoccupation with materialism, as though we believe, and I'm an immigrant to the United States, so I grew up in other countries, and so did my wife. And so what was really noticeable to us when we moved here, and we love America, is how incredibly preoccupied everybody was with materialism and possessions, as though they gave some sort of status, and therefore how they apparently gave some sort of happiness. And the incredible amount of, as I was saying earlier, the garage sales we now see as the baby boomers now are trying to unload all of these items that no longer are bringing them, well, they don't need them, whether they're bringing happiness or not, but they're certainly bringing them unhappiness because they need the money now for other things. But we built a society in the United States on consumption. And now what happens? When does that end? When you consume more than you make, everything ends. You know, capitalism is about more for less. And that whatever happens in creating businesses, you end up, the consumer ends up with more for less. But as things start to change, and what happens is companies start to take over and things shift, then all of a sudden you end up with less for more. So you're getting less for a lot more. And that's when socialism really starts to creep in. And that's the kind of shift that I'm really seeing. You know, I said my wife and I grew up in another country, different areas, different towns, but we've noticed the same thing with these two small towns that we grew up in. And both of them had always been with a local merchant, downtown section. They were small. The merchant was an important person in the town, whether it was a shoe store or whatever, but the money stayed in the town. You could work, a lot of people would work at those particular stores. They were people that would participate in the Rotary clubs and the various service groups. But that was the way society was. Today, both those towns, as an example, those downtown sections are completely almost gutted out. If there's end stores, there's a dollar store or something like that's down there. But they've been replaced with the malls. And both of these places now have malls. And all the malls are corporate chains. The merchants are gone. These towns now are weak and failing badly. Why? all that profits does not invested back in the town. Once the mall was built, the profits are going somewhere else. And so the people in the town just barely getting by. And we're watching both of these particular areas just implode. So the corporations, and I'm not trying to pick on corporations, have now moved in. But now the prices, this goes back to more for less, less for more. They priced out all of the store owners because they could give you more for less. But now the prices are incredibly high. I saw in New England a lot of marine trade here for years, and it was cutthroat. No matter where you went, you were buying something, somebody else could give it for your boat for cheaper, and they had incredible expertise. Well, that's all changed now. Slowly the competition was all amalgamated, merged together, and now we basically have one supplier here in the Northeast, and you go in and I just choke at the prices, and then the clerks have no idea what you're talking about. And I watched that in 20 years. So this corporatocracy, and again, I'm not trying to pick on corporations, we've just become unwieldy, and our chase of consumerism and our chase of materialism has allowed this to foster, and now we're not getting more for less. We're getting less for more, but we're now a slave to it. But we're really a slave to consumption.
You're right, Gordon, and I think that people who have listened to our previous programs and your other programs with other guests know that beneath the surface of this implosion or coming implosion of retail, there's some larger forces at work, and one is, of course, the debauchery of our currency, of our money, and that the centralized government and central bank is pursuing something we know is fallacious, which is they think that printing money is the same as printing wealth, and of course we know that's not the case, and this system feeds centralization by corporations, the corporatocracy. And so I think it's very clear to me that that these large centralized corporations, global corporations, and global government and central banks it's one system. They work together, and this massive centralization of power and financial power is part of the cause of this unstable system and the rising cost of living and the destruction of local economies. And if this is progress, I think we're on the wrong path.
I think our bottom line message here today, Charles, is for us to rethink what progress really should be based on.
Yes.
That the growth is in fact unsustainable, and in fact we're not seeing growth anymore globally. It's slowing dramatically, and the consumption that drives it is inappropriate. What the answer and the solution is, well, we'll keep working on it. We did a show called Peak Growth a while ago. We did one on peak consumption. So if any of our listeners want to look at either one of those shows, we'd have a lot more details in some of these questions. We're grappling with what the solutions are here this morning. Charles, we have to break. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, I think these are topics that will become, I think, front and center as the retail sector starts exhibiting the difficulties that we've discussed in this show.
Charles, the last comment I'd make to our listeners is right now we're so enamored or caught up with what's happening with monetary policy and what central banks and the Federal Reserve is doing, but we need to remember that there's three types of policies. There's public policy, there's fiscal policy, and monetary policy, and when any one of them becomes weak, it all starts to collapse. And the bridge between public policy and fiscal policy really only works and happens when we in fact produce more than we consume. And when that shifts, fiscal policy and public policy get themselves caught in a phenomenal trap. What happens then is that monetary policy becomes dominant, and when it becomes dominant, you have another problem. And when it becomes dominant, the handoff from fiscal to monetary policy, that overlap, you see unsound money come in. And you move to fiat currencies, and we've already done that. So then your monetary policy becomes central, and then it gets to be cheap money is the solution, and then you get malpractice, misallocation of capital, misinvestment, mispricing, and that's what's happened. And unfortunately, that then destroys the capitalist system. And it starts with consumption. It actually comes with the flawed belief in consumption, as we've tried to point out here. And unfortunately, the only way out of this is it ends up creating more and more socialism until the system actually implodes. And unfortunately, I hope that's not what's ahead of us, but we need to really think about consumption. We really need to think about our value systems and materialism to understand why it got us on this particular road. Charles, can you tell our listeners how they could learn more about your work and your writings here before we close?
Please visit me at of2minds.com. Thank you, Gordon.
Talk to you again next month, and if I don't see you, have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Same to you.
Talk to you. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.